Are we starting to see the beginning of a possible NASCAR comeback? Well, let's talk about that. How's it going, everyone? My name is Eric and welcome to Out of the Groove. I'm just going to cut right to the chase because I have a pretty hefty episode in store for you guys today. To put it simply, this year's Daytona 500 saw its TV ratings increase by 8% from last year. Reported by Adam Stern from Sports Business Journal, the Daytona 500 this year saw a 5.5 in the ratings category, up from a 5.1 in 2018. Now it is worth noting this is still down, about a full point from 2017, but remember we still had Dale Earnhardt Jr. in that race. I think things have changed quite a bit. We gotta celebrate the small victories if you're a hardcore NASCAR fan. So after 2018 saw record low after record low when it came to TV viewership, TV ratings, it's nice to see that the first two Cup Series races, because the Clash also went up 3% viewership. It's nice to see that the first two races this season have gone up a significant amount in TV viewership. Not only did this Daytona 500 see an 8% increase in viewership, we're talking hundreds of thousands of people there, it was also the most viewed event of this past weekend, besting even the NBA All-Star Game. You can also see here, reported by Adam Stern as well, that NASCAR Race Day, the pre-race show, also went up 8% in viewership, which is also pretty significant, pretty cool to see. And you can also see the top markets, kind of the traditional NASCAR markets. Not a lot of surprise there. That's where most of the NASCAR TV audience was located. If I may insert my opinion right here, I must say, as a longtime fan of NASCAR, it's very refreshing to see positive news come out of the TV ratings front. It's just something we don't see very often, so it's nice to, enjoy this victory for a week, In this day and age, a lot of sports are struggling to maintain the same levels of TV viewership they saw, 7-8 years ago. Motorsports have probably been hit even harder, not just NASCAR. IndyCar isn't doing super well. Formula One in the United States has still not taken off, so of course all the smaller motorsport series, don't have anywhere near the power that NASCAR, IndyCar, F1 have, so not doing too great for them either. Motorsports in general has not seen great TV viewership just at all recently. So when we see an 8% increase, again, we're talking hundreds of thousands of viewers right there. When we see an increase like that in the sport's biggest race, as far as NASCAR is concerned, I think it deserves, to be talked about, and it deserves to at least be kind of celebrated. If you're a hardcore fan, you want to see the sport succeed, I think you can take this week as kind of a victory. However, I do want to address the critics because I have seen a fair number of them, as usual, when it comes to NASCAR. I've seen some people try to credit this ratings increase due to the fact that the race finished kind of later at night in prime time, so to speak, and as a result, it allowed more viewers to trickle in, as the evening got later and later. It's typically good for TV viewership, so I saw a lot of people saying that, the only reason ratings increased this year is because of all those red flags at the end of the race with the big wrecks, that it dragged on later and later and more people got a chance to see it. And now the reason that's not a very strong argument is because last year's Daytona 500 kind of had the same thing happen. There were red flags late, the race drug on, I think even later than this race this year drug on. So by that logic, last year's race should have still had higher ratings than this year's. So that argument really doesn't hold any water. Another argument I've seen is that this year, NASCAR didn't have to go up against the Winter Olympics. In 2018, last year, the Winter Olympics were kind of going on at the same time as the Daytona 500. So some fans are saying that, that took away viewership in 2018 and, those people just came back in 2019. Now, again, I don't think this is a super strong argument either because like I said, we're talking about half a ratings point here. That's hundreds of thousands of people. I really don't think that there are hundreds of thousands of people watching the Winter Olympics in 2018 that then decided to switch over to NASCAR this year. I don't think those fan bases crossed, and it's the Winter Olympics, The Winter Olympics are popular, sure, they have certain events that are very popular, but they don't even compare to the Summer Olympics, which are typically the biggest view getters. Especially when you look at the top markets for this year's Daytona 500, it's a lot of southern states, Tennessee, North Carolina, Kansas even, I don't think southern states like that are super interested in the Winter Olympics. I could be wrong, but I don't think the Winter Olympics took hundreds of thousands of viewers away from NASCAR last year. So at this point, I think both those arguments really aren't that great, aren't that strong. So in that case, why did ratings increase this dramatically for a NASCAR race? What happened? What was the reason for this? In my opinion, there are two definite reasons, and I think they both kind of went hand in hand in a lot of ways. We've talked about some of these on the show already this offseason, so this might be you might remember some of this from what we've talked about already. Remember a couple weeks ago, it was reported that NASCAR was going to be spending $10 to $20 million on outside advertising this season. For many years, NASCAR had only advertised, on Fox or on NBC during their broadcast. They really didn't go out and spend any extra money, on other sources. So this is the first year, 2019, that NASCAR has actually made a substantial investment on advertising. And now I think we already have some hard examples of NASCAR spending a little bit of this money. An interesting detail about these TV ratings is that Fox saw a more than 30% increase in viewership from a couple major markets, Boston and Washington, D.C., two markets that I typically wouldn't really consider to be like hot NASCAR markets. So why did we see an increase within these two markets? It probably has something to do with Barstool Sports. Barstool Sports, from what I can gather, I'm really not very familiar with them, is an online sports media source. It looks like it's a mix of sports and entertainment, kind of just a lot of like casual sports fans, typical dudes that like football and basketball. It's kind of that sort of audience from what I can gather. I'm probably being way too general about this, so correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the way it feels. And they have a major connection to Boston specifically. Boston is a big sports town. We all know they're very loyal to their Boston teams. Over the course of this past week, Barstool Sports ran several promotions with NASCAR and even had some of their drivers. I know I saw Corey LaJoie and Chase Elliott take part in certain promotional activities. I don't know if any other drivers did, but I saw those two for sure. Barstool Sports is pretty popular. They have over 1 million followers on Twitter, so NASCAR reaching out to them, obviously probably spending some of that ad money to run some sort of promotion through them and through their platform, clearly must have made at least some form of an impact. The CEO of Barstool Sports also was in attendance for the Daytona 500. He himself has a pretty big following. I think he has more than 800,000 followers on Twitter, so he also, being at the racetrack, tweeting about the race, talking about the race, being there in person to experience, and we all know, if you've been to a NASCAR race, there's really nothing else like it. Him being there in person had to be good press as well for NASCAR, going to a new audience in a lot of ways. Sure, a lot of the people who follow Barstool Sports probably aren't your typical race fan, but if they liked what they saw in that Daytona 500, they might stick around for a few weeks and give it a real shot. But now Barstool Sports isn't the only form of promotion. We've seen NASCAR run new ad campaigns. They've done away with the whole Daytona Day thing that they tried a couple years back that I don't think many fans were a big fan of. It didn't strike any chords. We've seen new commercials, new ads, new focuses for NASCAR on TV. Another form of NASCAR promotion I saw this week came in the form of the NBA All-Star Game. Several high-profile NBA athletes, Damian Lillard, James Harden, and Kyle Lowry all wore NASCAR-themed shoes for this last Sunday's All-Star Game. Now, all three of those basketball players are affiliated with Adidas in some way, shape, or form. They all have shoe deals with Adidas. So what it looks like to me is that NASCAR went to Adidas and likely tried to, pay them to run some sort of cross-promotion here to get their, sport, their brand associated with the NBA All-Star Game. Another chance of reaching out at a new audience that maybe typically wouldn't be that interested in NASCAR or that interested in auto racing. If you get some people to maybe pay attention to the Daytona 500 and they see what they saw on Sunday, again, you might get some people to tune in for a few more weeks. You never know. Now, that's just half of it. Again, I don't think the Barstool Sports crossover, I don't think the NBA All-Star Game with the shoes, I don't think that contributed to hundreds of thousands of new viewers for NASCAR this weekend. I think another major factor was just simply that this year's Daytona 500 was pretty darn entertaining. Jeff Gluck, great NASCAR reporter, always runs his, poll after each race. Was the race good? And you can see there, over 80% positive response. This year's Daytona 500 was widely considered to be very entertaining. I talked about it, in my episode after the race. Sure, it dragged on kind of late with a few late race wrecks, but all the racing we saw up to that point was fantastic, especially by Daytona standards, by Gen 6 car standards. It was fantastic. And even the wrecks at the end, while it dragged the race on, it was very slow. It was definitely a spectacle that, if you're a new NASCAR fan or somebody who doesn't watch that many motorsports, if you tune in and see those crazy wrecks, that might pique your interest and at least make you, keep you on the edge of your seat, and you might want to know how it's going to end. That probably has something to do with why NASCAR's ratings ticked up so strongly, because a lot of fans were tuning in as the race sank into prime time, moved into prime time. They saw these intense crashes and probably hooked them for a little while, and then they wanted to see how it was going to end because you only had 10 laps to go in the race and everyone was just waiting to see who was going to win the thing, I think that played a large part of it. So when all is said and done, I think we can all step back and say NASCAR made another good decision. That decision to spend $10 to $20 million on advertising, I don't think they spent all of that for this race, but they definitely spent some of it. To spend that money on advertising, it's already paying dividends. And, it's already made the Daytona 500 go up in viewership, and that's huge. Things just seem to be going so well under Jim France right now. He's saying all the right things. Now they're doing all the right things too. That's the change. In the past, NASCAR's often said the right things, but then they often don't do the right things. Last few months, with some of the new rules changes, especially with the new penalty change to the post-race penalty change and everything, I feel like a lot of fans right now have more confidence in NASCAR than they have in years, and that's crazy. That's great. I said at the very beginning of this episode, maybe we're seeing the beginnings of a comeback for NASCAR. That's obviously me getting ahead of myself. That was hyperbole. Just because the Daytona 500 and the Clash saw increases in viewership, that doesn't mean that NASCAR is, going to start rising high again and getting back to, what its glory days. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but I've said before, on this show and also on the NASCAR Weekly podcast that I'm a part of, that I think NASCAR is near or has already hit its valley. I honestly think 2018 might have been NASCAR NASCAR's low point. You know, the first year without Dale Earnhardt Jr., you know, you have all these other superstars that are gone from the sport. The package wasn't perfect. The schedule isn't great. Starting in 2019, and you know, the Daytona 500 ratings kind of back me up on this, I think we're going to start seeing a small trajectory back in the right direction if you're a NASCAR fan. You know, I don't think every race this year is going to go up in viewership, for sure. I think there's still going to be a lot of races that stay around the same viewership as last year or even continue to fall further down. But I must say, after the first 2 races this year going up in viewership, the way we see that happening, I'm optimistic. I really am. I'm actually optimistic about NASCAR's TV ratings for the first time in years. I hope you guys are excited because I certainly am. I'll have another video up later this week talking about Atlanta. We still have a lot of stuff to talk about for that race. It'll be the first race where we kind of start to see what this new aero package is going to look like, so we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about there, I'm sure. Thanks everyone for watching. As always, you can follow me on Instagram or Twitter. You can get yourself an Out of the Groove t-shirt down in the description. Also, you can check out my P.O. Box address if you want to send me some cool NASCAR stuff. I'll show it off and shout you out in a future episode. Also, thank you to my Patreon supporters. Shout out Michael Harrison at GWizofTheStars, SelfishGifts.com, Mentally Defective, Cameron James, Tice Moore, John Koblenz, Tim Shingen, Jason Arlong, Wesley Donaldson, Isaac Dennison, Mika Suzuki, iFantasyRace.com, and the rest of these amazing Patreon supporters. Thank you all so much for your continued support. I love talking about NASCAR with you guys. I love talking about racing, and I hope you guys enjoy listening because this is just so much fun. I really appreciate the support. Again, thank you all for watching. I'll be back later this week with another episode, and yeah, hope to see you then. Peace out, everyone.